All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining the web tips for June. This web tips is presented by myself, Kent Engel. And, just a couple of housekeeping items, of course. Everyone is muted, but you can still ask questions. There should be a place in the Zoom interface for you to input any questions. If you have any during the course of the presentation, feel free to put in any questions as they come up. And I've got my trusty co-worker, Mark, here, who will help me field any questions while I'm presenting this. So a little bit about myself before I get started. I've spent a little over 5 years in the development space, mostly in user experience, game development, and agile methodologies. I've been with Clear Process Solutions for about 4 years now, and have been doing Winshuttle development for the majority of that time. So the topic today is around repeating tables within Composer and how we can interact with those repeating tables using Excel. So the purpose of that is enabling out-of-the-box Winshuttle solutions for basically translating Excel data that you would have in a worksheet into repeating form data quickly and reliably. So there's ways to do this in the workflow using PowerShell, which is a more custom approach, but we're going to be reviewing a method to do that in the form, which is a lot quicker and doesn't require a bunch of custom code. It's 90% out of the box Winshuttle functionality. So how can this be done, you ask? There's a couple different places we need to go to make this happen. First of all, of course, we need to be in Composer, creating a couple rules and setting up a couple preferences in a repeating table that we wish to use this functionality with. So it's really enabling this functionality as kind of just a toggle in any repeating table, which I'll show you in Composer, which allows you to, first of all, export any data from a repeating table to an Excel sheet, and also allows you to import data from an Excel sheet to that repeating table. There's additional functionality within Composer that we're going to set up, which is custom. It's optional functionality, but it greatly improves the user experience, and it's only one line of JavaScript. So it's very simple to set up, and you'll see what I'm talking about once we kind of dive into the solution. So within Excel, we need to start with a template which represents every column that's in the repeating table. And we need to format that template as needed with the way that it would kind of be represented in Composer. So the way to create the best user experience is to make it as identical as we can to how it's represented in Composer, so that we don't run into validation issues when we use this import functionality. And then within SharePoint, we need to create a SharePoint list, which stores environment variables, which basically, as you'll see, is just a link to the Excel data template that we're setting up, so that when users are using the form, they can have a place to click a button and instantly get the most up-to-date version of the Excel template. Because if you have drop downs in the repeating table, sometimes the values of those drop downs change. So this is a way, when the solution changes, when data from a SharePoint list, which is driving a drop down, changes, you can easily gain access to the most up-to-date version of the Excel template, which would also have to change without having to deploy any changes to the solution. It's all just updated within a SharePoint list, like you would update the values in the drop downs themselves. And then we need to create a document library which stores the most up-to-date version of that template. All right, so bringing that all together, using all these resources together, it enables developers to quickly create a template in Excel, and enables users to always have the most updated version of that template, like I said, while being able to quickly and easily convert a large Excel document into form data. So yeah, working with Excel documents sometimes is a lot easier for users because you can quite easily copy and paste from one Excel file to another. It's a lot, there's a lot more features in Excel for ease of use in terms of getting data in an Excel spreadsheet. Whereas, sometimes in Composer, if you don't use these Excel features, you might have to do a lot of manual input, which can be time consuming. All right, so with that being said, I will dive into the solution. So this is what the form looks like, within SharePoint. I just set up a basic repeating table with a description, a cost, a quantity, a size, a rim size, and a tire spec. So we've got two drop downs here, which have hard-coded values. And then some functionality here, which drives, a total cost. So if I just set up some data here. And export this data to Excel. You'll see, it starts a download of a file, which if I open that up and enable editing, you can see, it's pretty much a direct representation of the columns and the data that we entered into the repeating table. But the caveat here, of course, is, we had a drop down here for rim size. We had a drop down here for tire spec. Those are just hard-coded values here. And you don't actually get access to all the drop-down values. It's just those values that you entered in there. So, if a user is starting out with an Excel template, which doesn't necessarily have any data in it, they, for one, might have, there's always the potential for them to put in data which doesn't directly correlate with the data that the form is expecting. So for example, we have 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, 22, and 24 for rim size here. Theoretically, if we just use this Excel template, they could put 14 here in the rim size, and it will try to import that into the form. So say you have 100 rows that you try to import with 14 as the rim size, because we weren't forcing that as because we weren't forcing those values that are in this dropdown in the Excel sheet. You can import 14 into these fields for rim size, but it'll show as a validation error. And then, you're going to have to go through every single one of those 100 rows and manually update that to an accurate drop-down value in the form, which is, of course, not a very optimal user experience. So what I have prepared here is a bit more of a formatted representation of what you see in, kind of the default non-formatted one that we downloaded. Where I have some drop-down values, which are a direct representation of the drop-down values you see in the form for rim size and tire spec there. And we've locked total cost out here. So double click in there, you'll be prevented from entering data into there because that's actually a calculated field in the form. And we don't want to run the risk of overwriting that in case somebody puts the wrong value into here. I mean, you can also set up calculations within Excel if you'd like, and lock this out. But have the Excel functions do the calculation. But since we already set up that functionality in the form, it's not 100% necessary. So to do all this fancy stuff is actually quite simple. As you'll notice here, we have a template sheet and a drop-down values sheet. So the drop-down values sheet, as you would expect, pretty much just has a column for those two drop-downs that we have, and then, stores all the values that we have as options. So to do that, you would just insert a new sheet by right-clicking. Actually, no, you would click the plus sign. Rename it drop-down values. And then you'd set that up like so, just put the name of a column here, and then put your values below it. So if we wanted this field to be a drop-down, you can go to the Data tab, click Data Validation, go to Settings, and everything is always set by default to allow any value. So you want to change that to a list, and then when you click in the source, it'll start kind of recording where in the Excel sheet you go. So then you click on drop-down values, you'll see that sheet now pops up in the source. Just scroll over whatever data you want and click OK. And we now have drop-downs for those values. So we could do the same here, data validation, list, source, scroll over those two values, click OK. So now we have some drop-downs. And of course, this is just a test sheet. You would want to make those drop-down values directly correlate with the drop-down values that you see in the form. Now, formatting something like this to prevent users from inputting data into fields that you don't want them to. There is locking functionality, protect worksheet or protect workbook. So if you elect to protect the worksheet, it's only the one sheet that you're on. Protecting the workbook protects everything. So if you click protect workbook, it'll protect this as well. So somebody will need a password to be able to change the drop-down values, which is honestly probably preferable because any user that downloads this template, theoretically without protecting the workbook, would be able to change these drop-down values and cause issues down the line with importing data. So you just create any password that you would like. And it should be protected. Let's see here. Need to protect both. Okay. So now it's protected. So I can't make any changes to anything. So since I can't make any changes to anything, of course, we'd need to unprotect specific cells, because really the only cell we want protected is the total cost cell, since that's going to be calculated in the form. So here, I actually probably need to unprotect it first to make these changes. Format cells. So if you right click in a cell, click format cells, and go to protection, locked is the setting that you're looking for. So this is basically how each cell is handled when a worksheet is protected. So if you uncheck locked for all of these, and we want to make sure that this one remains locked, put the password in again, protect the sheet. We're locked out of that. But now we can change the values that we want to change. So again, if we go back to the one that is already formatted, this just allows users to have a much more friendly user when utilizing this Excel template that we're using to upload to the form itself. And you know, just a disclaimer, you can see there's drop-down values for all of these cells going down, but I did not do that for the example that I just showed you. So you will need to do that setup for the drop-down values for all of the cells that you want to have drop-down values in. So when you're adding your validation, what I typically do is I'll select, well, we only want to do it for one column at a time, but I'll select the whole column. I'll hold Control and click the name column so that we're not creating drop-down values for the name, since that's just a display. So now I have, you know, every single cell selected but the top one. And then I'll go through and do add the drop-down values there so that every single cell has it instead of just the top one that we set it up for. So now that we've got this, actually before I import it into the form and show you that, I'll show you the remaining setup that we need to make all of this work nicely. So I've created a document library. And that document library houses the Excel template that we created. So it's really just a home for it. And then the environment variables list that we created has a couple columns. One is a link to that template. One is, you know, a name for the variable, which is just template link. It's kind of an identifier for what this is that we're storing. And then the solution name that we use it in. So we've created environment variables lists for different Composer solutions for varying reasons. But really what the environments variables list is meant to do is store anything that can change in a Composer solution over a course of time that you don't want to have to make deployments to update. So this is a perfect example. You know, we want to store a reference to this data template, but we don't want to have to make deployments in case that there's some sort of change to the data template. So you would get that link to the document by simply right-clicking the document in the documents library, copying the link address, and then going back over to environment variables and pasting it in here. So then within our Composer solution, we just add the environments variables as a data connection. And the way that this works best is by automatically retrieving the data when the form is opened. So you want to be careful checking this checkbox when you're using lists that have a ton of data in them, but typically the environments variables aren't storing a lot. It's really just storing a few links or a few pieces of data that can change over the course of time. So, you know, loading 10 to 20 rows on form load is not very taxing on the system. So it's okay for something like this to load it when the form loads. So just a side note, if you don't check this checkbox, in order to retrieve the data from this data connection, you need to set up a query within the form, which kind of either loads via a rule or loads when the form opens, but either method kind of stops the form from doing anything at that period of time and puts up a little loading message and runs the query. So it's hard to create rules back to back since it kind of pauses all other form execution at that point in time. So it's just a bit friendlier to the user experience and a lot quicker to forego the query in this case and use and load everything on form load. So then we will create a little helper field, which I've called template link helper. Edit the rules here. And here we're just retrieving the template link on form load. So you'll click the run rule on form load checkbox, and you'll set up well, we could just set this rule up just to go through the process and show you what that looks like. So we set up an action rule, set a field value for the template link helper, and then down here, you want to click the insert external data. We're using a data connection, and the only data connection that's in the form, which is environment variables. We want to retrieve the variable value, which is that link. And we want to filter based on the solution name being equal to Excel WEBtips demo, which of course is whatever you elect to call your solution. And we want to put quotes around that. So this doesn't need to be a form field. You can hard code a string into there. And then variable name is equal to template link. And that will format the get external value automatically for you. So that results in this. So every time the form opens on this, well, actually, yeah, anytime the form opens in general, it doesn't have to be on this view since it's running on the field itself. It'll automatically update the link that's referenced in the form to whatever is in this value. And once this button is clicked, here's the one line of JavaScript that we have to make all this work, which is what I was saying is, makes this a whole lot more user-friendly. The JavaScript line is just window.open, and then in parentheses, you put the value of what's in your template link helper that we just set up. So it's really just, window.open, it's executing that on this link. So if we go back to this site, you can see what exactly that does. As soon as this loads. So if we click the download Excel template button, you'll see it automatically downloads that Excel template here. So instead of a user, having to go out and try to find that information, having to go to the lists, go to the document library and download this themselves and do some searching, everything happens within the form itself. So, right next to the table where they're trying to interact with this data, there's a button that allows them to download the template right then and there. So now, you've seen the export to Excel functionality. You've seen how we're setting up the download of the Excel template and how we're downloading the Excel template. Now we want to upload Excel data to the form. So we're going to choose a file. This is the one that I had already set up and added data to. As long as you set up, what I recommend to do is kind of start with this as a base. And if you remember, this is like the exact representation of what we saw from the form when we exported to Excel. And you don't need to have any data in these fields either. You could just have a blank repeating table, click the export to Excel button, and you will be presented with a sheet that looks exactly like this. So it automatically formats it in the order that you need for all of those columns in the repeating table. So that once you click this upload Excel data, it automatically kind of knows where to go to find that data. So my data has headers. Yep, we have headers in it because we exported from Excel, and that's automatically what popped up there. And then here you can replace the content, update the content, or append to content. So replacing, of course, if there's anything in the repeating table, it will completely get replaced by what's in the Excel file. If we update the content, it will update line for line. So like if you have 5 rows in the repeating table and then you have 6 in your Excel file, it will try to update content based on, what might have changed. And then append to content, if you have 5 rows in your repeating table, of course, and then you have 6 in the Excel file, just add 6 to what's already in the form. So we want to upload. And as you can see here, it uploaded the data that we saw in this template that we just sent to it. And in the total cost, it did the math for us within the form because we have rules on these 2 fields to, multiply the cost by the quantity, and did that math there. So again, really where this is quite useful, which, we're actually using this at one of our clients right now, is for validating that the proper data is in these drop downs. And for example, if this is a repeating, or if this is a number field, making sure that users cannot put letters into the number field. So it's a lot easier to do this little bit of setup to make this Excel template if users are going to be uploading many, many rows of data, because it's a lot easier to prevent them from doing the wrong things up front than it is to allow them to do the wrong things and then expect them to fix it down the road when they've already, uploaded 100 rows into a repeating table and are now getting validation errors in the form and then have to go row by row to fix those. If you have a nice Excel template right off the bat, which just forces them in the right direction and shows them the data that they need to enter into these fields, it makes things a lot quicker. That was the demo. So yeah, in conclusion, quick and easy setup, mostly out of the box. As you saw, it really just has 1 line of optional JavaScript, which, it's a really easy line of JavaScript, and it adds so much, so much ease of use to the user experience to the form that I think it's worth it. It's powerful. Using this functionality can save a lot of time in scenarios where users have existing Excel data and they would like to mass import into a form, or like I mentioned before, when copying and pasting from, either SQL to an Excel file or from an Excel file to an Excel file. We all know copying and pasting from some data file to an Excel file is much easier than trying to copy individual pieces of data into a form. And it's user-friendly and maintainable. So this method ensures that only proper data is uploaded from the Excel file, so validation errors do not occur. And it's easily maintainable since the template can be updated at any time, and the form automatically grabs the most recent link to the template, so you don't have to keep deploying things to keep the template up to date. So I did not see any questions come in. Can wait for just a second in case anybody does have any questions. Feel free to ask. And I'll just quickly continue on to the future events as anybody types in any questions that they might have. So reminder, the next web tips, as we have them monthly, will be Thursday, July 16th. If you didn't know already, it's, the web tips are usually on the 3rd week of every month. So Thursday, July 16th is the next one. If you have any ideas for web tip topics, anything that you'd like to see, you could send them to info@clearprocesssolutions.com. And this web tips, along with all of our previous and future web tips recordings, can be found on our YouTube channel, which if you just type in Clear Process Solutions in YouTube, you should be able to find it. And I don't see any questions still, so I'm going to assume I did an amazing job at explaining that if I toot my own horn. So yeah, thank you everybody for attending today. Hope you have a great day, and I hope this helped somebody. Thank you.